Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So one of the king conspiracy theories is that 9/11 was an inside job. And perhaps you've been mocked by your friends or family for even bringing up this discussion. But joining us today is someone to really help shine light on this issue, especially since a recent article and report came out that basically has FBI agents testifying, saying that the CIA was highly involved in the orchestration of 9/11 and that two of the men that were involved and that were supposedly hijackers were actually CIA agents. So this is going to be an incredible interview. And so to help us make sense of this is Richard Gage. So Richard is a San Francisco Bay Area architect. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects. And he's a founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. So he, along with his courageous wife and his assistant Gail, continue to lead the charge towards a real investigation into the destruction of all three World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. So you can find more about him at richardgage911.org. So folks, let's go ahead and jump into this interview with Richard Gage. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you on the show.
You're so welcome, Seth. Great to be here with you too.
Wonderful. So it's interesting if I go back and reflect the journey that I've been through and, you know, what people would call waking up or the red pill journey, or just the process of realizing that what we've been told isn't really what's the truth. I think that after COVID, a lot of people see that much more clearly. For me, it was coming across this documentary called Loose Change 9/11. It was back, around, maybe 2008, 2000. I think it was actually probably 2006 or 7 when I found it. And it was a documentary all about all the things that just didn't add up about 9/11. And that was what started a lot of it for me, was thinking, okay, there's something that's seriously not right here. There's a lot of discrepancies and inconsistencies. And so we're going to be diving into a lot of this information because you're someone that is now leading the charge in bringing this information out to the public and hopefully bringing it to the courts and finding justice. But before we dive into that, how about you just give us a brief background of yourself and your expertise? Because I think it's important for people to understand that you're not just some guy that's cooking up theories in a basement. You're a professional that understands architecture and engineering, and you've risked your entire career to come out with this information.
Well, I suppose that could be stated as true. I don't know, because as soon as I became aware of what really happened on 9/11, my career changed. I realized I had an ultimate responsibility to share this with other architects and engineers. And so I founded the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth in 2006. And I'd been an architect for over 20 years at the time, working on steel frame, fire-protected buildings. And one of the largest projects was in Las Vegas. The most recent project I worked on a $400 million mixed-use project with 6 blocks of retail and 2 mid-rise office buildings and parking structure, altogether about 1,200 tons of fireproof steel framing. It's been a great career. I've worked on numerous institutions like city halls, animal shelters, and libraries, and many, many different types of retail operations too, malls and so forth, strip malls and residential before that. So it's been quite a varied career, but it all came to a screeching halt in 2007 when what I was doing I'd started out giving this presentation to the architects I worked for in Walnut Creek, California. They all kind of thought I was nuts because I had been telling them about what I was learning. I'd heard on the radio from David Ray Griffin that a third tower came down. And I'm going, what? I'd know if a third tower came down. And sure enough, it did. We'll be talking about that today. But also the way the Twin Towers came down completely unexpected. And of course, we were all in shock because we didn't have any frame of reference about this. We were under attack. And I, just like everybody else, was watching in horror on TV, even as the second plane came in and hit the second tower. So I spent a couple of months putting this information together because it hit me over the head hard. I mean, I was a flag-waving Reagan Republican. I wanted to go into Afghanistan and Iraq and get those bastards who did this to us. So this is not, this was completely, foreign to me. Conspiracy theories. This is the first time I'd ever heard 5 years after 9/11 on the radio like this. And so, I took a couple of months and I put together a presentation. I brought it into the firm. I bought them all pizza. So they had to come in and sit down and actually watch this stuff. Once they did, Seth, every one of them raised their hand. Yeah. Oh my God. You're right. These are controlled demolitions. You have to see the evidence, the photos, the videos. It's absolutely extraordinary. These sets of evidence that we now have at richardgage911.org, and in the presentations and the videos that I've made, particularly 9/11 explosive evidence, experts speak out, my 1 hour and 1.5 hour documentary on the subject. And we're updating that now with 9/11 crime scene to courtroom. We're going to take the evidence piece by piece with dozens of experts and lay it all out there for the grand jury, because this information has already been submitted by the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry to the grand jury. Now we're bringing those 60 exhibits alive in this film series format, 9/11 crime scene to courtroom. So that's gives you a little bit of the history there, and even where we're heading, and looking forward to digging into the meat of it.
Yeah, well, let's start with Building 7, because it wasn't until later that I think it was probably once I saw a documentary, right, that it hit me. It was like, wait, a third building fell? Everyone knows the Twin Towers. Everyone saw the videos, the planes, the buildings coming down. And there's all kinds of things that seemed suspicious about that to me. But then the fact that many hours later, another massive building just fell at complete free fall, as if someone pressed a button and has detonated it. And I'll pull a video of that. That was what really, that was the tip. That was the smoking gun for me, that something wasn't right. But let me go, I'll pull the video up, because I think that people have to see this. And so really, for people that are watching this, and maybe they already know, but I want this interview to be an interview they can, the viewers can share with their friends and family they've been talking to about this stuff. Because a lot of the times it's like when you brought this information to these architects, it wasn't that they just disbelieved you. It was that they didn't have the evidence. And once you showed them the evidence, it's like, it's hard to be logical and to not see there's something really afoul here. So let me go ahead and play this video. So, folks that are watching, I apologize for the audio listeners because you won't be able to see this, obviously, but this is a video of Building 7, which was the third building to collapse. Let's go ahead and play this for people.
The East Penthouse has already come down in this video. Otherwise, you would see it up there on the left side. And now the entire global collapse ensues. And that's not your best shot of Building 7. If you can find, oh, here we go. There's another one. It's standing still, and all of a sudden, suddenly, symmetrically, it falls into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. And that is, as you mentioned, Seth, at free fall acceleration. And all of these incredibly hot clouds are rolling away 35 miles an hour in cauliflower-shaped forms, indicating much hotter, much more heat generated inside of this collapse than you would even see in a standard controlled demolition, which it looks very much like. So we find evidence in the piles of these all of the buildings, extreme temperatures, molten metal, molten iron. So again, the building kinks in the middle because that's what they do in controlled demolition. They take out the core columns all at once, followed by the perimeter columns about a second later. And then the building can fall and the outer shell falls in on the inner shell. So there's less damage, if any, to adjacent buildings. So that's typical in controlled demolitions. And this happened at 5:20 in the afternoon. Now, this building was not hit by an airplane. It was actually bombarded by laterally freely flying structural steel sections from the Twin Towers when they came down in the morning. And many of them were trailing thick white smoke clouds. All of them were actually. And these started fires in World Trade Center 7. And this is the official cause of this building's collapse, are these fires, which if you look at them, they're few, they're small, and they're scattered. So fires have never in history brought steel frame fireproof skyscrapers like this down. So we have a real problem with the official narrative of how this building came down, which was, by the way, 7 years later. This building investigation was taking that long before they issued the final report. And so everybody who even knew about it, and which is very few, they had forgotten about it. In fact, the American Institute of Architects, of which I'm one of 90,000 members, never issued one bulletin on this, the third worst structural failure in modern history after the Twin Towers. So it should have been the most studied failure ever. Again, no plane hit it. And fires never brought down a skyscraper. So what really happened here? Well, once you dig into the NIST report, you realize it's full of fraud from beginning to end.
Folks, I've got a quick message for you. Right now, the world is very, very actively going through a process that the experts are calling de-dollarization. And look, I've been talking about this for well over a year now, but maybe you're now starting to see it in the mainstream because they're now talking about it because it's really happening. Well, what does this mean? Well, there's a few factors, but there's two main factors. One is that the BRICS nations, okay, this is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a whole coalition, they are actively getting rid of the US dollar. They're stopping their trade in the US dollar. And this is significant because the dollar's losing its status as the global reserve currency and as the petrodollar. This is what gives our dollar its value. But the other thing is that we have an enemy that's within our own government. Biden and his administration, they are actively working to destroy the dollar. And you can see it in their actions that they're not trying to save the dollar. They're actually trying to destroy it because they want to roll out their central bank digital currency. So you have these two forces coming in both at the same time working to destroy the dollar, because what happens when that dollar gets destroyed? Well, literally your life savings, if they're sitting in the dollar, whether it's in a savings account or a bank account or the stock market or an IRA or a 401k, those savings, that money could literally be wiped out in a matter of days, weeks, even a couple of months. We're already seeing it with inflation, which is going to be much, much worse. If you're seeing the writing on the wall and you're thinking, what can I do to protect myself? Well, there's a few recommendations that I always have. One is just to make sure you've got your food. If you have land, ammunition, whatever it takes, real tangible assets. But fundamentally, the thing I recommend most is precious metals, gold and silver. Look, precious metals have survived the collapse of currencies, the rise and fall of civilization. And also a big factor in this is that the BRICS nations, their new currency they're introducing to replace the dollar, a lot of experts are saying it will be backed by commodities like precious metals. And so you can see there's going to be a stabilization and I believe a dramatic increase in the value of precious metals. Not to mention, look at the past 6 months, we're seeing 30% plus increase in the prices of silver and gold. So if you would go back and say you put $100,000 into silver 6 months ago, it could be worth well over $125,000, $130,000 because the dollar is losing its value. So folks, if you want someone that you can trust for buying your precious metals or gold and silver, I would highly recommend Dr. Kirk Elliott. So Dr. Kirk Elliott is a good friend of mine, but he's a strong Christian patriot. He understands what's happening in the world. He's got 2 PhDs, one in theology, one in economics. So it's the perfect blend of understanding, realistically, money in the end times. So if you want to set up a free consultation with Kirk's team, head on over to goldwithseth.com. So again, that's goldwithseth.com, or call 720-605-3900. Again, it's goldwithseth.com. You go to the website, you scroll down. There's a simple form that you fill out right there. You put your email, name, contact information, and that sets you up for a free wealth consultation where you can talk to either Kirk or one of his experts to really understand what your options are. Or you can just call 720-605-3900 to take action today. Look, I've seen a lot of videos. There's been some tall buildings in Dubai that have caught fire. I've seen those in China. You've seen videos, even recently, in the past few months, of massive fires on huge skyscrapers. But you've never seen a building come down like that. And if you have seen a building collapse, say from an earthquake or something, usually you look at it and it's kind of like half of it's crumpled. So there's still some standing, but then maybe half of it's also, fallen down. But the only place I've ever seen a building where the top of the building comes down at free fall is in a controlled demolition. And so with this, though, looking at building 7 and then the twin towers, how did they fall at complete free fall?
The only way a building like this one, building 7, can fall at free fall is if every one of the 80 columns in this building are severed instantaneously, the core columns, followed by the perimeter columns instantaneously, all of them at once on each floor, and then repeat that synchronistically floor by floor. Fire does not have that level of precision. Let's all agree on this. And these fires are few, they're small, and they're scattered. So that is the only way this building could have come down. And guess what? That's exactly what the scientific forensic evidence in the aftermath of the building show. We have extremely hot pools of molten iron. And we have temperatures that are picked up by surface temperatures picked up by NASA overflights, thermal imaging. They show 1,400 degree temperatures on the surface, shielding what's much greater temperatures deep down in the pile that are found by the first responders. They say like lava flowing from a volcano down the channel rails of the I-beams, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I'll say this, obviously I've never blown up, things with jet fuel and know the heat of that, but even a little aluminum can doesn't melt. Say if we're throwing, say in high school, you throw a beer can in a fire and the next day it's still there. So the idea that they would cause these beams to melt and become molten at that kind of a heat, well, for one, you would think, wouldn't these buildings be engineered to resist that? If a building was engineered, it's almost like if my house, hypothetically, there's certain building codes to it that, like a 40-mile-an-hour wind can't blow and knock the whole house over, right? It's made to withstand. So I would imagine that they're designing these buildings to withstand things like planes crashing into them, fires, etc.
Well, let's look at jet fuel first of all. It's like kerosene. ME Petroleum, one of the major manufacturers, says it burns in open air at a maximum of only 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that's not even as hot as office fires can get to. They can get to 1,000 degrees, rarely though. They can get to 1,400 degrees, rarely though. But there was no fires on the surface of this pile of building afterward. So those surface temperatures that were picked up by NASA a week after the event were revealing something much hotter deeper down in the pile. And then we find the the evidence of that with, as I mentioned, the first responders, molten metal, which is in fact flowing out of the South Tower, well, the North Tower, and also the South Tower. 10 minutes prior to its collapse, the South Tower is spewing molten metal. Now, this is not airplane, because NIST said, oh, that must be melted airplane. No, molten aluminum doesn't melt, first of all, until 1200 degrees. And so, but this, it doesn't, it is silvery in daylight conditions. It doesn't glow bright yellow and white hot like you see these molten metals dripping out of the crab claw excavators. We can tell by the temperature of molten metals, by their color, what their temperature is. And these are exceeding 25, 26, 2700 degrees. So again, office fires don't even get half that temperature typically, especially the office fires in all three of these buildings, which were diminished and going out at the time of each of their collapses. So they're cooler. They're oxygen-starved fires indicated by the thick black smoke also. So and surely the mechanical action of each of these three descending buildings would have put out the fires that were burning in them, albeit small fires were put out. So why do we have pools of molten iron seen, in fact, like a river flowing, seen by the structural engineer, Leslie Robertson himself, structural engineer of the World Trade Center, saw a river of steel flowing? Well, because he was down there, he was looking at it. Everybody was blown away. The temperatures, the incredibly hot temperatures, Bechtel picking up 2,800 degrees. The author of the FEMA report, Jonathan Barnett, citing the ends of the steel beams were partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures, he says. Well, it takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel, and we have lots of examples of that evaporated steel, particularly in Building 7. And so this whole set of extreme temperatures has no causality in the official narrative. It only has causality if you look at the suspect called Thermite, an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. And indeed, we see exactly that, thick molten slags off the ends of the steel beams, 45-degree cuts at the ends of many of the steel beams with thick slag pouring off of it, having already poured off of it. We see from the evidence of the U.S. Geological Survey in their detailed analysis of the dust, billions of previously molten iron microspheres throughout all the World Trade Center dust. It's completely ubiquitous. In fact, the EPA called this component of the dust a signature component. In other words, it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has these. Well, where could they come from? First of all, they're spherical, indicating they were molten at the time of their formation. That's liquid iron, which, by the way, FEMA saw in their original report in Appendix C, the metallurgical examination of the steel from all three towers. So they have, they said a hot liquid molten iron attack on the steel, hot sulfur attack on the steel with liquid molten iron. And well, where does the sulfur come from? Well, sulfur's added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. And in fact, that's what we find in the dust also, because a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen finds abundant samples. They were given 7 independently collected samples. Every one of them contained these red-gray chips, red on one side, gray on the other. The largest of them is about a 16th of an inch. And they go, wow, this is curious because it's attracted to a magnet. So it has a high iron content. Well, they get real curious now. They look at the red layer where the iron is, and they find through X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy that it contains iron oxide and aluminum powder, the ingredients of thermite found in what they thought was paint in all the World Trade Center dust samples. This is not good. They get real curious. They zoom in 50,000 times and they find iron oxide rhomboidal-shaped crystals and aluminum platelets smaller than the diameter of a human hair, 1,000 times smaller, nano-sized particles of the ingredients of thermite in all of the chips. That should not be. So they're set in an organic bed of oxygen, silica, carbon. This is organic material, which is put in TNT to increase the gas expansion to cause things to blow over, to not be knocked over in explosions. So this is what they've found here, given that they're nano-sized particles, the surface volume increases exponentially. So they have engineered, and the originators of this material found in all the World Trade Center dust engineered an incendiary, which works by means of heat to destroy steel. And they've engineered it to become more explosive. So they find in their test, when they put these chips and ignite them in a heater, a differential scanning calorimeter, they ignite, producing what? Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found in all the World Trade Center dust samples by R.J. Lee, by the U.S. Geological Survey. So now they never identified where those spheres came from. They couldn't. They wouldn't. They didn't even guess. It was a huge mystery. But now we know where they came from. They came from these red-gray chips, as if we didn't know, because they're actually found attached to these partially ignited red-gray chips. So this is a self-repeating set of experiments, repeatable, that corroborates exactly where these spheres came from. In other words, how the World Trade Center came down. It's absolutely clear. It's all documented in a 25-page peer-reviewed paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal in 2009. It's called Active Thermitic Materials in the World Trade Center Dust Samples.
So when you mentioned that these explosives are oftentimes used in military application, one thing for me it goes into is like, okay, well, if it wasn't just, a terrorist attack by some Al-Qaeda cell and our government was involved, it's like, well, who was it? And so I want to walk us back. I've got two documents to show, one going back into history a little bit and looking at some declassified documents, but the other is an article that just came out, which is really the article that the news that kind of spurned this contact, because this is a really big issue. So let me first jump back take a little back in history. Okay, this is back in the 60s. So there was an operation called Operation Northwoods. Now you can see in the image there, this is on Wikipedia, right? I don't like using Wikipedia, but sometimes they're good at, as being a neutral place to show, look, it exists, right? This isn't some weird website of a declassified document that's declassifying what's called Operation Northwoods. Now, listen to this, folks. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation against American citizens that originated within the U.S. DoD and the U.S. government in 1962. The proposals called for CIA operatives to both stage and commit acts of violent terrorism against American military and civilian targets, blaming them on the Cuban government and using it to justify a war against Cuba. So the document's going to further go into how it would be done, and how, part of it actually talks about using civilian aircraft basically to cause terrorist attacks. So they could then blame it on somebody to justify a war. So this is a declassified document from the 60s. Now, JFK, thankfully, did not agree to it. And maybe this is part of the evidence that they built up against him and said, okay, we gotta get rid of this guy too, because he wouldn't go along with plans like this. But then the information that came out just this past week, I'll pull this up right here. Now, this is an article. Now, it's not CNN, right? But so RT, Russian Times, this is explosive information, in my opinion. I mean, to not pardon the pun there, but so special service, so declassified Guantanamo court filing suggests some 9/11 hijackers were CIA agents. So I'll read a little bit from this article because this is really significant. So an explosive court filing from the Guantanamo Military Commission, a court considering the cases of defendants accused of carrying out the 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York, has seemingly confirmed the unthinkable. So this document was showing in this court filing was showing that there were FBI agents that were testifying and saying that all this evidence they had led them to believe the CIA was involved with this. So let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit here. It's talking about two of the men, two of the hijackers and how they came to America and everything. But then getting into some of the other texts I want to read, that basically the CIA officers, okay, let's see, I got down here. So they had them named, the FBI officers, right? So one of them was CS-23. There's different names for them. So in this report, though, it says CS-23 recounted how the CIA repeatedly lied and stonewalled the FBI in its investigations into Bayoumi, which Bayoumi was one of the people that actually aided these two hijackers, right? So furthermore...
He's a Saudi official, actually, too.
That too.
He was paid.
There you go. So furthermore, CS-23 was certain that the CIA used its liaison relationship with the Saudi intelligence services to attempt to recruit Hazmi and Midhar, two of the hijackers, and circumvent laws prohibiting the agency from conducting spy operations on U.S. soil. So it continues.
And that's 18 months before 9/11.
There you go. It says this account was backed up by another FBI investigator, CS3, who further claims that Bayoumi set up bank accounts and was renting an apartment for the two hijackers in San Diego. Him doing that was done at the behest of the CIA. I think I have one more. That's okay. So there's some other information in this article, and I can't read the whole thing, but basically, and you can explain this to me, but my understanding of this, what this article was showing us, is that the FBI was investigating for potential terrorist attacks. They were also going against it and trying to stop these things from happening, but their investigations repeatedly met with walls when they got into the CIA areas of this. And then even the higher up levels. And
by the way, the military also had projects like Able Danger, who was doing the same thing, and they were shut down when the Bush administration came into power.
Interesting. And so it's not like
they were successfully infiltrating Al-Qaeda and had a huge database on them.
Interesting. Okay. And so what it just, to look at this, and for a lot of people that maybe denied that the U.S. government, that the 9/11 was an inside job or whatever, but here we have these declassified documents, FBI agents testifying, saying that they believe that the CIA was behind multiple people that were involved in the hijacking, and that the CIA knew in advance that the 9/11 attack was going to happen and prevented the FBI from getting involved. So to me, this is really damning evidence, but what do you make of this information?
Well, here's what the CIA is going to come back and say. We were trying to stop the attack. We knew about it, so we were assisting Bayoumi to assist these hijackers so we could get involved in it and stop it at the last minute. And guess what they did at the last minute? They called the FBI and they said, we lost them. So now they've shifted the blame to the FBI because the FBI has responsibility for operations inside the U.S., and the CIA is not supposed to do that. So the CIA hired Bayoumi, a Saudi official, to run this because they're not supposed to be running operations inside the U.S. Well, what's really going on here? Those of us who've done the research in the 9/11 Truth Movement understand that the CIA was and had to be involved in the operation from its inception and making it happen. That's what is shown. After all, the towers were blown up from top to bottom and from bottom to top in the third tower. So this is an inside operation, possibly also with help from foreign intelligence agencies. But the Saudis did not have access to the Saudi hijackers, or the Saudi officials did not have access to the most highly defended buildings in the world. So clearly, it's the explosive demolition that proves that this is an inside job from beginning to end. And when you look at the behavior and the appearance of the planes coming in, it's most likely the case that the hijackers were not even on them, that they were remotely guided, and that they were outfitted on military bases to be much more precise, because most pilots agree that they couldn't hit a 200-foot wide target at 500 miles an hour.
And it's also,
they tried in simulators.
In the Operation Northwoods, it talked about a remote controlled civilian plane being used to cause terrorist attacks. And so piecing this all together, because, okay, so let's say the journey of understanding this, it's like, at first it's, okay, there's no way the US government's involved. And then you start to kind of piece it all together. It's like, okay, it definitely was an inside job of some sorts, with involving the CIA, the Saudi government, probably Israeli intelligence, etc. But there's two questions I have. Who, in your research, who do you think was really behind it? Like, who was the puppet master that orchestrated the entire event? And this may not be an easy question to answer, but the other question is why? Why would, say it was the CIA or the DOD, why would our own government cause a terrorist attack that took thousands of lives on American soil?
Well, we have to look at what happened following 9/11 to see what were they trying to engineer? What is the outcome that they needed to have such an incredible theater of false flag operation? We've got the invasion of the Middle East, Afghanistan and Iraq. We've taken over the opium production in Afghanistan, which skyrocketed following the Taliban's ouster under U.S. control. By orders of magnitude greater production than it was when the Taliban was there. We have the assumption of the oil production in Iraq. We have the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which crippled our civil liberties. Any of us now can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. We can even be tortured and assassinated. So civil liberties, and that, of course, set the way for the loss of our civil liberties through COVID in the last couple of years, which there's tremendous number of parallels between the false flag operation of COVID and that of 9/11. So you look at who could have engineered this. You look at the Project for a New American Century, PNAC.org, who still has on their website their goals for a vast increase in the military budget and the regional hegemony in the Middle East. Goals that they stated on their website would take a long time to achieve, absent a catalyzing and catastrophic event like a new Pearl Harbor. And Bush writes in his memoirs the next day, or his diary, today we had our new Pearl Harbor. Well, those individuals who are the signers of the PNAC document were brought in with the Bush administration to assume positions of leadership. And so Key, Wolfowitz, and others, Cheney, a key neocon, If he wasn't a signer on that, he should have been. So Rumsfeld, they produced what they needed to happen in the world, and trillions also, not just gold heists under the Twin Towers, under the Building 6, which was also controlled. It was also demolished in a controlled demolition. But bonds that were due on 9/11 didn't have to be repaid. Bonds that were used to take down the Soviet Union. This is documented by James Corbett in his great treatise video on YouTube. 9/11 trillions. Follow the money.
So it seems like there's a lot of motives. And one thing that I've had to just adjust in my thinking is that if we look at our government, and I'm not saying all the government, there's a lot of good people in the government. There's a lot of good people in politics, but I believe there's also a lot of really bad people. And I believe that it's a profession that attracts people that want control for the wrong reasons. And if we look at them as just being the government and people that are meant to protect us, it's hard to make sense of this. But if you look at them as from the perspective that perhaps our government has been infiltrated by criminals. Imagine if the mafia took over our government. How would they run our government? Well, they'd be doing things like this because it allows, like you said, the Patriot Act or their wars, or say they wanted to seize control a large part of the opium production and trade all over the world, which is huge business, right? They could then go seize the poppy fields over in Afghanistan, as an example, or different regions. So it does make sense if once you piece it all together. And that's what I think that this is for a lot of people that woke up. 9/11 was the initial key that unlocked something because it broke that cognitive dissonance or that normalcy bias that says, that this isn't Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia. That stuff doesn't happen anymore. We're past that.
Yeah. But we're not. It's just gone undercover. To reiterate your point, the opium production in Afghanistan exceeds the oil companies all put together, their profits. So it cannot be underestimated what was going on there. So it's an important research project. Also, you have major corporations across the board benefiting enormously. So why didn't we hear about this on TV? Any leaks of controlled demolition or overwhelming evidence of an inside operation? And you look at the media; they benefited enormously. Well, who runs? So they're going to censor the truth, and they're going to propagandize the run-up to war because who runs the media? Well, it's the same groups of individuals as determined by, in research by the Sonoma State Project Censored Project. It found that the same people running the arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, all run the media as well. So they're all interlocked, and it's bad for us. Those of us who don't have these kinds of resources to get the truth out there.
Yeah, which is why what you're doing is so important. It's why I started this show, just to become another voice that's trying to bring some of this into the conversation. So I want to, before we finish, I want to pull up your website because I want to encourage folks to visit. Again, this is richardgage911.org. So richardgage911.org. And there's
this is our film.
Yep, there you go.
Well, look at the film, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, an unprecedented film series taking hard evidence of 9/11 crimes to court. This is getting it right to the grand jury, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a project that needs all of your support out there so that we can get it done. We're raising $54,000 for phase 2. Phase 1 is building 7. It's in the can already. And so this project is running forward smoothly.
Good. And I want to encourage folks to go there. And if you want to support, through the website. There's a donation button top right. There's also on the right-hand column there, support us. So, and also becoming a subscriber to the Substack is one of the great ways to support independent journalists these days. Or just sign up for the email newsletter. Just get the information, share this information. I encourage the folks that are watching or listening to share this interview, because maybe you've got a friend or a sibling that doesn't want to hear what you're saying about COVID and all the different pandemic aspects of COVID. Maybe this is a good place to start. Show them, or maybe just fast forward, show them the Building 7 clip and say, how can you make sense of this? Because we have to continue trying to get this information out there, because, in a world that's ruled by evil lies, truth is the weapon against those lies. So,
and I'm dedicated.
I am too. Well,
I'll never stop, Seth. I'm guessing you won't either.
No, I won't. I absolutely won't. They'll have a hard time. Yeah, they'll have a hard time.
Our country's at
me.
stake. I mean, this is a coup against the country, 9/11 and COVID, both against freedom in our country. And we're losing it fast.
We are. Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'll have to have you back on again. This is our first time, but I think there's probably a lot of topics that we could be going over together. So I really appreciate you giving us your time today.
Oh, you bet. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks, I've got a quick message for you. I have one simple question. If today you could no longer go purchase more food for your family, with the food stores that you have in your home, how long would you be able to feed your family? Would it be a week, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, a year? This is a really important question, folks, that we have to be very realistic about, because the elites are proactively trying to put us into a state of food crisis and a state of famine. I'm sure you've seen all of the different food processing plants and farms that are blowing up. You've got cattle dying by the tens of thousands. They're proactively trying to collapse our food system, because they know if they can control our food, they can control us. And so one of the best ways to be outside of their control is to be able to have our own stores of food and to be able to produce our own food. So there's really two things I would recommend. One is having heirloom seeds that you can grow your own food with, making sure that they're non-GMO heirloom seeds, that way you can harvest your seeds this year, use them next year. You can use these seeds for generations. Literally, that's how it will work. The other thing, though, is this high-quality storable food. This is food that's sitting somewhere. It's hidden in your basement, buried in your backyard, whatever it is. So that way, if there is a crisis, if there is an emergency, you might have 3 months set aside to get through that time period. And so for this, I would highly recommend a company called Heaven's Harvest. This is an amazing Christian-owned patriot company, and what they're doing is they're making high quality storable food. Again, a lot of the food companies, they say these food buckets, they're all about maximizing calories per dollar. They're filling the buckets with a bunch of filler and junk like sweet beverages, etc. But Heaven's Harvest, they focus on very high quality food that will last up to 25 years on the shelf. They also sell heirloom seeds. So you can buy all of your seeds, you can buy all of your storable food. And look, folks, personally, I would recommend having at least 3 months per person in your household, if not 6 months or even a year. Again, depends on your budget, but I would definitely make sure you have some seeds, because those seeds could be worth their weight in gold, if not more, in the future. So to go ahead and do this right now, go open up a new tab and go to heavensharvest.com. And if you use the promo code Seth, that's SETH, promo code Seth, you'll save 15% off of your entire order. So again, folks, the time is running out, and you'd rather be 3 months or 1 year early than 1 day late. Again, heavensharvest.com, and use promo code Seth to save 15% today.